Senator Rubio.
Thank you. I want to focus a little bit on the international narcotics and law enforcement funding. In particular, we've seen this extraordinary rise in the production of cocaine in Colombia, and we know that's going to be transited here, primarily through land bridge, through Central America, but potentially through air routes as well through the Caribbean region. And at the heart of the challenges facing El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras in particular is the role that these transnational groups play on the ground, and each has struggled in its own way to confront it. I'm most familiar of the three with the Honduran efforts. And obviously I also look at the Colombian model of assistance over the years as something people have pointed to as a model of success. And in fact, in many ways, the Colombians have become force multipliers for us. They're now on the ground in those countries in Central America providing assistance, although there's some concern about some recent decisions they've made with their own program vis-a-vis the peace process there that some attribute to the rise in cocaine production. So my first question is just an analysis of where we are in terms of how that overlays with our policies in the region, because ultimately one of the, I think, most compelling arguments is that the U.S. southern border doesn't really begin on the Mexican border. It starts much sooner than that in places like Guatemala and the like. So three quick opportunities here to discuss. Number one, how would you assess the progress of those programs and where they stand today? Obviously, each country has different challenges in the Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. Number two, do we believe that the capacity, even the increased capacity of these nations, is quickly going to be overwhelmed by the massive amount of cocaine that needs to be moved over the next number of years? And number three, the potential to partner with the Mexican government, who has their own concerns about instability just south of them, and how those three things play out is in the interplay between the assistance we provide and our foreign policy aims for the region. I know that's a three-part question, but they're all interrelated. So.
Well, I'll take a quick stab at giving you an answer, although, I would have to just defer to some of my colleagues who deal both with international narcotics and law enforcement and also with the Western Hemisphere affairs. But I do think we're making progress. I recognize the challenges that you've outlined. And I would also say, again, as we look at the entire array of countries that we are assisting, we are looking at all the foreign policy elements, and that involves human rights issues, other kinds of issues, governance issues, and so forth. But I do think with regard to the international narcotics effort, we're making some progress. This is another area where I would argue, again, we have authorities and funding. DOD has authority and funding. It only makes sense for us to be, again, bringing those efforts together. Section 333 actually addressed some of those authorities, not all of them, but some of them. And that's another, I think, set of issues that we are now sitting down at a table trying to look at in terms of what we can do and what DOD can do, identify, again, some priority elements within our strategy to try and make sure that the proper resources are addressed in those directions. By the way, you mentioned Colombia, just to say, I mean, one of the things that I think is underappreciated sometimes is that we not only do security assistance writ large, what we do is stabilization. And in support of the peace process, for example, in Colombia, the State Department is very active in terms of demining, removal of unexploded ordnance in some of the areas where the peace process has indicated they need that help. We did a fair amount together with the Norwegian government to put in place a donor effort that will lend itself to that. So we're actually looking not just at the security assistance per se in terms of aiding the relevant forces on the ground. It's also in support of a larger effort at stabilization that will then create an environment, we hope, in which these things will not reproduce themselves.
I guess the only follow-up I would have on that is one of the issues we run into as we discuss these programs on an annual basis is in many of these nations still, the military becomes the default law enforcement organism as opposed to traditional law enforcement from a variety of different reasons. And how would you assess where we stand in terms of capacity building for their own justice system, in essence, the training and equipping of police officers and other law enforcement officials, their court system, their systems of justice? How does that generally play out in the broader, everything from prisons to prosecutors to,
yes,
to defense attorneys for that matter? How do those things interplay, and what do we do to assist in that regard?
I can't agree with you more. I think my INL colleague, Bill Brownfield, Ambassador Brownfield, would argue the same thing. I mean, this has to be a longer-term approach, and it cannot simply be military-focused. We must do what we can to build rule of law throughout, throughout the countries of concern. I think we're making some progress, I will tell you, but it's not uniform, and I think we're going to have to work harder with them together in partnership. So it's a long-term problem, and we're not there yet, that's for sure. But we recognize the importance of everything you just said.
Senator, and part of that equation is also working with our defense ministry counterparts in these countries to understand the proper role of the military in a government and society led by civilians, and so helping them understand sort of their proper subordination, if you will, to civilian leadership is part of that equation that we have. DoD has programs that are dedicated to.